So my name is Pedro Cardoso. I'll be your host for this session at Media Innovation Circle. And our guest is Mario Verdicchio. Mario, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. It's a true pleasure to have you here. And it's been way too long that we saw each other, but the current circumstances, but it's a true pleasure to have you here. Mario is a researcher at the School of Engineering at University of Bergamo in Italy. He's a member of Berlin Ethics Lab at the Technical University of Berlin in Germany. He's also co-founder of the xCoAx International Conference on Computation, Communication Aesthetics, and the Elusive X. So he's written a lot about philosophy, artificial intelligence, and in his own words, he says he's a Sunday artist for some years. Mario, he will be talking about to us about computers and arts, thinking, creating, rethinking, and recreating. Mario, once again, thank you very much. It's a true pleasure to have you here, and the stage is yours.
Thank you for having me, Pedro. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I hope I can share my screen without a problem. Usually with PowerPoint and Zoom, they have some issues. Let's see if it works. Well, worst case scenario, I will just keep it not in presentation mode, but just to have the slides. Let's see. They're not so fancy slides anyway, so it shouldn't be a problem.
I think it's working.
Okay. Outline view. Oop, nope. I wanted to minimize the. Okay, well, if this is okay for everybody, I think we can start. I will apologize for the framing with all these extra buttons, but the content is in the center, so this is the most important thing. I'm a little bit embarrassed because this working group is called, it has innovation in its name, the MIC, the I stands for innovation. And I'm just starting with a super old ASCII table from the 1960s. But this is me. I'm a middle-aged, tired computer scientist, and I'm starting really getting tired of all these marketing campaigns I've been hearing around the world, especially when it comes to AI recently. I do come from AI, so I've been working in AI for quite a long time. And my normal condition was to be taunted by other computer scientists. I kid you not, there were big computer science professors making fun of me. You still call yourself an AI researcher? Are you still telling people that your field is AI? You're so crazy. And this was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, during one of the upteenth AI winters. And now everybody's talking about machine learning. Everybody's talking about the AI revolution. And for people who've been in AI for quite some time, it's really an eye opener and also a huge letdown and a downer, because you realize with your experience as a researcher in a certain field that what people or marketing people call innovation is just a repurposing of things that you've seen, you've read about, and they're just rehashed and presented in a new way. There is an undeniable technological evolution to it all, but the principles behind all this wave, they're still the same. So today, I'm going to come to you very jaded and not very innovative, but somehow with a glimpse of hope for the future. Because indeed, if we're still talking about the same things over and over again throughout the decades, then there must be some sort of grain of truth behind those repetitions. And so maybe that, as a repetition, could help us in our investigations as researchers, as artists, as human beings, for what it means to be human in this world, and what it means to make art, what it means to be creative with technology. However, I need to go back to the 1950s, and this is and 1960s. This is one of the earliest printed versions of the USA ASCII code chart. This is a set of rules. It's actually a correspondence between different characters that were to be shown on the screen or to be printed on printers, and numbers. If you look at this table, you will see that it's indexed. You have some binary numbers on the rows, some binary numbers on the columns. And this is a way to create a correspondence between, for instance, the character capital K, which you see in the lower right-hand side of the table, and some numerical codes, row 11, column 4. This means that if you put together these two numerical indexes, 11 and 4, that's a convention by which you can represent the capital K by means of numbers. This way of making a correspondence between entities and numbers, this is what we as computer scientists call encoding. And encoding is everything when it comes to digital technology. So I apologize for the innovators and the creative people there, but I'm going to go full lecture mode here for a brief amount of time. So encoding is a biunivocal correspondence between a set of entities of any kind and a set of natural numbers. So biunivocal correspondence means you have two sets, you put one set on the left-hand side, you put the other set on the right-hand side, and you're able to create two rows, or I would say in this slide, two columns, so that you have one entity on the left-hand side that correspond to one entity and one and only entity on the right-hand side. And they somehow are in this correspondence. So you can refer to the entity on the left-hand side by using the entity on the right-hand side, because it's a one-to-one correspondence between the two sets. So you can choose any sort of entities on the left-hand side, but if you're doing encoding, then the entities on the right-hand side, they must be numbers. So what does encoding mean? Basically, setting a set of correspondences between whatever you want in the world and a set of numbers. That's all. That's all that you have to make computer science work, at least from a conceptual perspective. Of course, when it comes to practice, there is something more to it. But let's take a look at what we use nowadays for so many things, including this very digital meeting. A computer. A computer is an automated tool. It's a machine that only works with numbers. It cannot work with anything else. Whenever you want a computer to do anything, you need to provide numbers to that computer. And this is why encoding is so fundamental for us computer scientists. Since we need computers to perform or to automatize whatever task we want to complete, we need, first of all, to transform things into numbers and then feed those numbers to the computer. So the input to a computer system needs to be encoded. Whatever you're working with, you need to first transform it into numbers. The computer works, it computes, it crunches numbers, and then you obtain some results. The results come out of a computer in the form of numbers, because that's what computers do. You need to decode those numbers into entities in the real world. So you're looking at me right now, you're listening to my nasal voice. I have a terrible cold. This is possible by means of computers because there is a process of encoding. My image is turned into numbers. Those numbers are fed into a computer, into a series of computers throughout the internet. And then when these numbers reach your computer, they are decoded into images and into sounds. And that's why you can see me, you can hear me somehow. And that's it. That's really it. This is computer science. So the question that's going to be lingering behind all my talk and all our discussions today is, so if this is computer science, if computer science boils down to transforming things into numbers, let computers crunch those numbers and then obtain new numbers and transforming those numbers back into entities in the real world. How can this work? What are we doing here? What are the implications of operating in this way that's fundamentally based on number crunching, encoding, and decoding? Well, first of all, creative people and their artistic endeavors, they are always interested in working with images, sounds. Well, we need ways to transform those images and sounds into numbers. The ASCII table I showed you at the beginning of the presentation was dealing with letters, but we're dealing with more than just letters. You're dealing with my image. I'm dealing with your image. I let my computer work on your image, and we're dealing with sounds, my voice, music we listen to on our computers, and so on. So we do need specific algorithms to encode images and sounds, at least for the purposes of this talk, but also for more creative purposes of, let's say, digital imaging and digital sounds. Well, this slides provides you a snapshot of how images are treated by means of digital machines. If you notice, there is just a pink blob, but this is the zooming in of an artistic image. If you zoom out, you would see this is a kind of the picture of a very fluffy sculpture made out of pink wool, but this is not the point. The point here is that every pixel in a digital image can be determined by at least 5 different numbers. 2 numbers will be used to encode the position of the pixel inside the image. So you have to imagine the image inside a coordinate systems with X's and Y's. So 2 numbers will indicate where that pixel, the most elementary, the smallest element of an image is placed. And 3 other numbers are going to be commanding or describing how the colorful components of the lights of the monitor will show that pixel. And depending on how much red you have, how much green you have, how much blue you have, you can create a mixture of colors. In this case, you have a lot of red, a little bit of green, a little bit of blue to get this particular shade of pink. So colors and positions, they can be expressed in terms of numbers. You will need your computer to be endowed with those extra peripheral machines that will change the computer's crunch by a number. The peripheral that will change the numbers crunched by a computer into pixels with specific colors at specific positions on the screen. The same goes for digital sounds. The coordinate systems is a fundamental step here. You might have heard before that sounds are, we perceive sounds because there are sound waves in the medium, in this case, in the air, in the environment that surrounds us. We can describe those waves like oscillations inside the Cartesian plane of coordinates. If we map each point of this wave onto these X and Y coordinates, again, we're able to describe the sound in terms of numbers. We just sample the points of this wave. Each point has 2 specific coordinates within the system. So instead of making you listen to the note of a piano, I will be able to send you a series of numbers of X's and Y's that in turn your computer will be able to transform into the sound of a piano. So you're able to listen to a piano sonata by Bach, for instance, by means of your digital MP3 player, for instance. And as I said before, text is the easiest thing because it's just a one-to-one correspondence between some characters that your text is comprised of and numbers. So text, my Word document, my PDF document, my chat message, the characters this message is comprised of are turned into numbers. The numbers are sent over a telecommunication channel, and then they're transformed back into characters at the other end, so that the destination, the person at the destination, is able to read the text I sent them. Although when it comes to text, I'm pretty sure we can just put it together with the encoding of the images, because if you notice, text is something that's shown on your screen. So whether you're looking at an E or a picture of an E, basically the encoding of text and the encoding of images, they rely on the same mechanisms. They are shown on your monitor, which is governed by specific rules for output operations on your computer. But wait, this is how digital technology works, meaning digital means made out of digits. And we work with digits because computer crunched digits. So we are endowed with the task of transforming things by means of encoding into numbers, sending them over computers, and then retransforming them into items by means of decoding. And we have this kind of encoding because computers are digital. We are working nowadays with digital technology. There is one extremely important distinction that I want to push today, and I want everybody to be aware of, if they're not already aware about it, is that computers are digital, but they're not fundamentally digital. So if we want to do computation, we must work with numbers. But just so you know, digital technology is not a necessity that is imposed by the numerical nature of computer operations. The computers that we use nowadays, they happen to be digital. They don't need to be digital. It's not a law of physics or a law of mathematics that imposes us the use of digital technology on computers. What happens? Well, towards the mid-20th century, these three American scientists, John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley, well, they made a huge discovery. They made the discovery of semiconductive materials, and they invented the transistor, and they got a Nobel Prize. Just so you know, they didn't get a Nobel Prize in mathematics. It doesn't even exist. They got a Nobel Prize in physics, because this was a huge discovery in the context of physics. I'll just be quick here because these are technological details that I must mention, but they're not fundamental for the point that I want to make today. So how does a transistor work? If you notice, a transistor, it's like a teeny tiny tripod. Nowadays, they're much tinier than this, but these are one of the original ones. It's a tripod, it has 3 points. And basically, if you allow a small current flowing from the point B to point E, then this acts as a switch, and a much bigger current will be allowed to flow from point C to point E. If you don't let a current between point B and point E, no current will be allowed to flow between point C and point E. In other words, a transistor, it's a switch that allows electricity to flow that is controlled by an electrical signal. So just to make it a little bit fancier with champagne, you basically are in control of a tiny finger. And if with that tiny finger, you move a switch, you will just free the cork and the champagne will be able to flow in the glass on the bottom of that vertical line. So basically the glass can be in 2 states, empty glass and glass full of champagne. That's how it works. You give a little electrical impulse and then the champagne will flow and the glass gets full. And that glass getting full acts like a weight on top of another finger, and in a chain, that finger can activate other corks, other glasses can be filled, and so on in a network of glasses. Champagne can flow. In real life, electricity can flow, and so electric signal can flow throughout this network of transistors. Et voilà. So this is electricity operated by electricity. We have tiny electrical signal that are the tools by which other big electrical signals flow is controlled. There are no material mechanisms here. There are no macroscopic moving parts. This was the biggest innovation in the 20th century from a technological perspective. And this is why your USB keys, your Fitbit, your smartphone, they are doing a lot of stuff. You're moving data, you're checking your the time, you're checking your calorie consumption, you're checking your step counters. However, you don't hear anything moving. There is no mechanism moving. Everything seems to be standstill, and yet you have a data flow, you have transformation. These machines are giving you output to your inputs, and so on, and so on, and so on. There are no moving parts. So hello electronics, goodbye mechanics. This was what the invention of the transistor allowed in mid-20th centuries. Well, goodbye mechanics, not everywhere. I still, I need some stuff to be mechanic to, to grind my coffee beans or even to fly a jet engine. Computers do not need to be electronic, but they are, because everybody loves transistors. So we went from a mechanics-based technological world towards an electronic-based technological world, because transistors, they are smaller, they are quicker, there are no moving parts, so you don't have cogs that break down or they get consumed that you need to maintain every few weeks. Everything works better with electronics. So mechanics is something of the past. This is a shout out to one of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time. It's called The Forbidden Planet. It's something for sci-fi connoisseurs. It's not so famous, but it is fundamental for the discourse on electronic machines. I'm not going to spoil this movie for you. It's about American astronauts just landing on a planet where there is a huge machine that basically makes them extremely smart, but also controls them and ultimately wants to do evil stuff. And this is particularly impressive because one of the characters who just fell victim to the evil actions of the machines, it tries to describe how this machine works to his colleagues. And he says, it's a big machine. No instrumentalities. It means machines without mechanisms. In particular, I'm from Italy. I watched this movie back then dubbed, and especially in Italian, they translated no instrumentalities into no mechanism. This is a machine without mechanisms, which back then, when the movie came out, sounded like a sci-fi concept. How can a machine be working if it doesn't have mechanisms, if it doesn't have what characterizes a machine? But this is exactly what electronics is about. It's electricity operated by electricity, meaning we don't need any moving parts for the machine to work. So this movie seemed to be hinting at the new wave of digital technology that was to come. The Forbidden Planet, the movie, I'm not here just to push this movie onto you, but it is really, really a fundamental first step in sci-fi and technology discourse, because it was the first movie ever to depict humans traveling faster than light starship of their own creation. It was the first movie to be set entirely on another planet far away from Earth. It was the first movie ever to feature a robot character with a distinct personality and an integral supporting character in the film. It's Robbie the Robot. It's the first real robotic character in sci-fi movie history. And it is the first movie ever to use an entirely electronic musical score. Why this movie is so special? It came out in 1956. Guess when these three guys invented the transistor? In 1956. By chance, coincidence or not, 1956 is, for us computer scientists, one of the most important years. It's really, but this makes the movie even more extraordinary because they were able to imagine a technology that was being invented at the very same time. So where is the digital in all this? Because I talked about digital technology of today's computers, and I was just talking about flows of electricity being controlled by other electronic signals. Well, this is where the encoding, of which I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, comes back very, very usefully. Actually, this is the most fundamental encoding of them all. You have to imagine that the empty glass of champagne is represented by the number 0, and the glass of champagne, full of champagne, is represented by 1. So where are the digits here? Where are the numbers? Basically, when the glass or the part of the electronic circuit that corresponds to the glass does not have any champagne, so it doesn't have any electricity flowing, that we interpret as a 0. Whereas when we manipulate the switch with electronic signals and the glass gets full of champagne, if in that part of the electronic circuit we have electrical power flowing, then we interpret that physical phenomena as a 1, which means that whenever we're dealing with a series of transistors connected to each other and we have an electronic circuitry, we have to go and check what kind of electricity is there. And depending on that interpretation, whether there is electricity, it will be seen as a 1. Where there is no electricity, it will be seen as a 0. So our electronic circuitry made out of transistors, they are a physical system with different patterns of electrical signals, which are interpreted by us as a sequence of digits, 1s and 0s. This is what the binary digital technology of computers is about. So are the digits really there? Well, digits are in the eye of the beholder, because if we forgot about this connection between electricity, lack of thereof with 0, and electricity being present as 1, then we just have electricity in an electronic circuit, nothing else. But this encoding, these rules, they enable us to interpret those electronic patterns as 0s and 1s. This is what turns just an electronic circuit into a system that we use for computation. There is a huge, huge caveat here. I told you that an empty glass of champagne can count as a 0 and a full glass of champagne can count as a 1. So that our electronic circuitry can be interpreted as a sequence of 0s and 1s, that is, a sequence of numbers, that is, it can be seen as a physical tool embodying mathematical operations. Let's get back to the ASCII table from the 1960s, the one that maps those 0s and 1s onto characters, like the capital K being 11, row 11, column 4. We just combine 11 and 4 to represent capital K inside a numerical system. If we fix that correspondence, we're fine. We can work on our electronic circuitry to have a sequences of 0s and 1s that represent that encoding 11 and 4, so that whenever we see 11 and 4 inside our electronic circuitry, we know that we're working with a capital K inside that. So we use electronics to represent something that is part of a text, something that is a specific character. So I can send that capital K over my WhatsApp, over my email system, over a website, and all the machines that follow that encoding will be able to have a capital K on the screen for their users to enjoy. Maybe it's the beginning of a nice text message or an email. The problem here is that those correspondences, they have been established by a group of people. The ASCII committee is the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. meaning that in the 50s, there was a working group of people that met and established that if they wanted to propose and maintain a correspondence between numbers, the numbers that were going to be crunched by their computers, and the letters, well, all computers crunching numbers would have to follow that correspondence. Otherwise, what is a capital K here? Who knows what's going to be over there? 11.4, the ASCII code for capital K, needs to be shared by all computers. Otherwise, we lose interchangeability. So the capability, the intrinsic capability of computers to communicate with each other by means of numbers relies on the fact that all these computers share the same encoding, the same rules. If those rules are established by a group of people, well, the rest of us, the rest of the world, to be able to join that communication network, that number-based communication network, they need to follow those rules. So in a way, we're talking about a small standard that is established by a small amount of people that needs to be imposed worldwide for these computers to be able to communicate. And this is where computer science and encoding, they start to be shown on a collision route with what is supposedly the freest world of them all, meaning the world of creativity, the world of artistic endeavor. Creative people, they really cherish their independence, they cherish their artistic freedom, cherish their creativity, and to be bound onto a table that was established by a group of people 70 years ago, this doesn't sound like the best way to be creative in a way. And yet we do have digital art all over the world. So somehow we need to deal with this apparent contradiction. I've been having lots of problems with this indeed. I was wondering myself, as a Sunday artist, as a computer scientist, as a neticist of computing, how can I reconcile the fact that I want to be creative by means of my computer, and yet this means buy into a set of encoding rules that were established years ago, decades ago, by a group of people who were part of a system that I might want to go against, in a sense. How can I be a rebellious artist if I am to use a computer that is anything but a rebellious item, since for a computer to work, it needs to follow these encoding rules that were established by the different committees that dealt with digital images, digital sounds, and digital texts. I've been struggling with this until, I have to say, I had my breakthrough experience thanks to Alejandro Inarritu. He's a Mexican movie director who came up with this installation called Carne y Arena. I had no idea what this was about. However, I happened to be in Milano when it was available at the Prada Foundation. Prada, yes, it's a luxury designer brand, but they made so much money out of Japanese buyers in the 90s. They had so much money, they just created a foundation and they started funding creative endeavors. And I have to say, this particular endeavor, it's really huge. I consider it one of the most significant artistic experience I've ever had in my life. I don't want to spoil it completely. However, I need to explain it somehow to convey my message to you today. If it's still around, it's not in Milan anymore. It kind of started, it was presented in Milan in 2018, and I think it went around the world for some years. I don't know whether it got retired. Should you ever have the chance to check this out, do yourself a favor, have this life-changing experience and experience Carne y Arena. It is a virtual reality, huge installation. This is not me, but this was me while I was experiencing this. I had a similar experience to this person depicted in the picture. Your bare feet put into a huge room and you're walking on sand. There are two other people who are not depicted here in this picture, helping you move around and making sure that you don't start running and bump into a wall or falling or hurt yourself. You are inside a VR helmet that gives you a 360 view. It's a visual scape, but also a soundscape of the Mexican deserts at the borders with the US, between I think Mexico and New Mexico, Mexico and Texas. It is geographically accurate. I don't remember the specific place. You're walking around, there is a virtual world. It is computer graphic, but it's pretty much realistic. You're walking together with other people that are trying to cross the border on their feet between Mexico and the US. At a certain point, they get caught by the border police, and you start seeing huge Jeeps and SUVs, dogs, policemen with dogs, helicopters looking for you. No, you are immersed in that environment, but no one notices you because you are there with the migrants and the policemen. However, you're like a spectator until, and this is the end of the installation, all the policemen start noticing your presence. So they start treating you the way they were treating the migrants up to 1 minute before. And I will stop my description there. The realism of such an installation was convincing enough, and I think they were clever enough to make the visitors walk bare feet on sand so that the body was tricked into thinking that we were really there. The graphics might have not been 100% realistic, but with those sensations under the sole of your feet, in a way you were tricked into thinking that you were indeed in the desert between Mexico and the US. And I realized this. I've been complaining about all these strict rules of encoding images into numbers, encoding sounds into numbers, encoding text into numbers. And I was playing the role of the rebellious artist, saying, I'm just going to defy these encoding because I don't want to buy into these impositions by committees around the world. However, I also realized that thanks to these encodings, thanks to all these constrictions and correspondences between numbers and images, between numbers and sounds, I had the possibility to enjoy a 3D virtual experience that super nerds and computer scientists and programmers were able to recreate under the direction of a great director like Inarritu. So this kind of reconciled me with the power of technology, because I realized this, that without the discovery of semiconductor materials, without the invention of transistors, without the introduction of imposed encoding rules throughout these decades, I wouldn't have been able to enjoy such a mind-blowing artistic experience. And Inarritu himself would have been able to recreate a virtual experience for all people in the world who were lucky enough to access this installation to live, I wouldn't say firsthand, but the closest thing to a firsthand experience, the experience of migrants trying to go from Mexico to the US on their feet. So, and this is where the ethical side of the discourse kicks in. What does it mean to do art nowadays? What does it mean to do art with computers nowadays? There are many contradicting factors. Technology is still based on exploitation of raw materials from developing countries, exploitation of work, of manufacturing work of people from developing countries. It is a product of capitalism. And this seems to be going against many artistic and creative endeavors that are pointing towards political and social art. Technology is based on exploitation of materials, but also imposed rules of encoding by special interest groups. However, we're still able to put all these discourses and all these technological endeavors together to create new kinds of artistic experiences that are also somehow connected to an ethical discourse. And indeed, they are built on top of a capitalistic system of exploitation of materials and imposition of encoding rules. And yet, this was the most effective way, at least from my very own personal perspective, of making me understand the discourse on immigration between Mexico and the US. And if you think of it, if you go back 600 years, 500 years, the most traditional, what is considered the most traditional art is not technological, maybe. It's not based on transistors, that's for sure. However, you know what this is, right? This is the Sistine Chapel that was created by Michelangelo in the between the 15th and the 16th century under the commission of the Pope back then. This is considered almost universally one of the masterpieces of visual arts in the history of humanity. No problem there. However, if I look at the Sistine Chapel with the same critical thinking that characterizes my view when I criticize exploitation of developing countries or imposition of encodings to make computers work, well, there was indeed lots and lots of imposition and constraints also back then. Because if you think of it, you might see this not as arts. I'm just pushing a very almost paradoxical perspective, but you may not see as the product of a free thinker, of a creatively completely independent master of art, but you might see it as a product commissioned by a very powerful and rich organization to just push their narratives onto their audience. I mean, I have nothing against, well, the Catholic Church. However, indeed, this is the product of an agenda pushing endeavor of a very, very powerful and rich organization. Comparable, actually, much more powerful than whatever organization is behind the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. So the discourse that technology introduces with all the constraints, it is indeed new somehow because the transistors is new, this kind of electronics is new, it was just invented less than a century ago. However, it taps into criticalities that lie between the discourse of art, the discourse of freedom, the discourse of autonomy, and the discourse of technology that apparently, if we compare Carne Arena and the Sistine Chapel, there has been there throughout all our history of humanities, because of humanity, because in the end, it seems to be that we're not able to have incredibly rich and cutting-edge works of art without having powerful, rich organizations imposing their own goals, imposing their own agendas, imposing their own encodings. So, is this something new? Is this a new way of looking at old stuff? Does indeed technology enable us to break free from old patterns, or is it just a new way of framing what's been there throughout all these centuries? And are we just trapped into this kind of mechanism when we're trying to do art with technological artifacts, or is there a way, an alternative way to really break away from these schemes? I apologize, I do not conclude my talk with answers, but with questions that I would love to discuss with you. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open to all your remarks, comments, and criticism from now on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mario, very powerful exit on your talk. You left us hanging with this question: is whether this technology is something that frees us or that bounds us in some way, and sometimes we don't even see this question upon us. It's so fundamental, and the way that you put it is quite clear. So I would like to open the session to everyone that wants to ask some questions. If you're a bit shy, you can also ask the questions on the chat, and I can ask them to Mario. Or you can say it so yourself. But I have here a question while you may ponder upon yours. Would you say that this is something that us humans tend to do upon ourselves? Imagine this an analogy between this or a comparison between this problematic and that of language. We communicate with a certain type of rules. We have a certain vocabulary. You have all of these combinations between a certain way of doing, independently of the language that we use. We can even share the same letters, alphabet, but when we try to express ourselves, sometimes we don't even find ways of expressing ourselves in our own language. We need to come up with some neologisms or something new, or sometimes we say, just draw a picture. It's easier to express yourself. When do you feel like we will have this need to do that with computational technology to actually really reinvent it, and to be actually aware of reinventing it to express ourselves?
This is an excellent question, Pedro, because you bringing language, which is one of the most fundamental ways in which we human beings work with each other, communicate with each other, but it's a way to circumscribe even more the limitation of computing technology. And I will tell you this: whatever endeavor we're trying to pursue with our computers, whether it is my presentation here on a PowerPoint, or it is with Carne y Arena and Arena and this virtual things, if we use computers, we need to write programs. So I'm going to put myself on a keyboard and I'm going to write programs. You know much better than I that we can write whatever we want on a keyboard, but only very specific texts that we write on our keyboards, they can count as programs, because you can write whatever you want, but our compilers of our programming languages will just basically shut down most of all the things we write down and will allow only a very small part of what we write as programs, because we need to respect the programming language's syntactic rules for that, right? When it comes to natural language, these rules are not there. I can write whatever I want and it will still count as a message. Even if I make mistakes for instance, if I try to write to you in Portuguese, I would make so many mistakes, it wouldn't even count as a text in Portuguese. And yet I will be able somehow to communicate the meaning to you. There are two problems there. First of all, natural communication between humans is far from perfect. How many times people fall into misconceptions, misunderstanding with each other, although they are both native speakers of a specific language. So natural language is not perfect. However, programs, so texts written in an artificial language to make computers work, they're even much more restricted than that. So this means that the rules by which computers can work, they are so much more restrictive that all those misunderstandings that we have in real life, we need to cut them off and we need to focus on whatever makes the computer work. But this means that when we're using computers to make whatever, we are working in a much narrower context than we do when we try to communicate with other people. So languages, although they're not perfect, they show us that we as human beings are already working on a much bigger playground than what computers are enabled and allowed to do. So if we have those misunderstanding problems there in the real world, imagine that it's a trade-off somehow. You cut those off, and so you don't have misunderstandings in the computing realm. However, your freedom is much more limited. So languages are a great way to show you how, again, we fall victim to rules in the real world, but even more when we try to do computation. And this connects very well to a question that Anna wrote in the chat. How do you see the encoding of emotions? Same thing. There is a new field that's called, well, new, relatively new, some decades, called affective computing. It's a way to try and capture emotions in humans by means of computer systems. The latest fad is these psychological support apps. If you've been listening to podcasts all over the world, there are many ads about these psychological help apps. They are sold to you with this kind of marketing strategy. Oh, you don't need to go to the psychologist cabinet. You don't need to leave the house. If you're shut in, no worries. You just have to download our app. You're gonna write some messages, and then the psychologist on the other hand will be able to analyze your text, etc., etc., etc. They're pushing this agenda even to further technological limits, saying that the rhythm at which you tap on your phone is correlated to your psychological state. So if you start tapping too quickly, it means you're in a manic phase. If you start tapping too slowly, then you're in a depressed phase, etc., etc., etc. Or they can check your facial movements through the webcam, and with minimal movement of your muscles, the computer is being trained to detect whether you're lying, you're nervous, etc., etc., etc. What does this mean? That there is an encoding of emotions? Not really. The three data types I mentioned during my talk, text, images, and sounds, these are the only data computers are able to encode because we have rules for that. Positions of pixels, correspondence between characters and numbers, and position of sounds samples within the Cartesian coordinate plans. That's all. So we are not able to have an encoding of emotions, but we're able to have an encoding of images of people feeling emotions. So if the image is like this, then you can map this to anger. Or if you come up with a theory according to which the tapping speed is too fast, then you're in a manic phase. Then yes, the tapping speed, which is can be easily encoded in terms of numbers of nanoseconds between one tap and the other, then you will have a correspondence to that. However, you have to, for now, for how things are in the technological world, you have to describe emotions in terms of images, sounds, and text, and then you use those encodings of sounds, images, and text to have a so-called encoding of emotions. However, again, we need to restrict ourselves to so much because this is how technology is. It's just numbers with computers. So if we are able to translate it into numbers, we might be working on it, but it's just correlation. So the subjective experience of feeling angry or the subjective experience of feeling joyful, that's something that escapes us. And by the way, Pedro, when describing emotion, that's one of the biggest challenges that we have in the natural language realm. So imagine encoding that.
Thank you, Mario, and Anna, for your question. Is there anyone that wants to pose one last question?
Well, am I already running out of time? Did I speak for too long? That's, I mean, I'm not surprised.
No, I think we are on time. All right, I have one last question that I would like to take the chance to ask you now. Um, and I'd like to get your opinion on this. How do you see encoding in the future, in a new age of computation? And how do you see how that will affect our everyday lives and our interactions with these machines and with each other? And what about the art and aesthetic experience? How do you see that may change? What's your take on this?
Well, let me start with the present. What I can see now is that, well, the limitation of image, sounds, and text is still there. However, the technological advancements enable us to encode more and more. For instance, the 3D virtual experience is the encoding of space. So it's not just an image that's on the screen, but it's an image where even points in space, at least the virtual space, are encoded into numbers. And we have computers that are powerful enough to be able to manage a virtual world that is a 3D world in which we can somehow immerse ourselves. So in a way, there is one dimension along which technology can help us, meaning more and more efficient computers, which means better and better encoding of images and sounds, so more and more realistic experiences. With the invention of the iPhone, well, let's put it this way, with the super huge success of the iPhone, tactile interaction was introduced for the mass market of IT technology. So now we're witnessing somehow touch as an extra layer, an extra modality of usage of IT technology. Nowadays, we tap onto our screens, we swipe, etc., etc. So the tactile dimension has started trickling into the IT world. However, if you notice, it's a very, very limited interaction because we only work as input givers. So I use my finger to give inputs to the computer. However, we're still far away from any virtual gloves or virtual vests that can give our skin some sensations that was produced by the computer. The technology is not there yet. And forget about smells. Well, first of all, with COVID, many people lost their sense of smell and taste, and there was a huge issue. We could chat with each other while we were shut in our homes with videos and sounds, and yet we were not able to have, I don't know, the taste of the bacalhau that I still love so much from Lisbon. It's not there yet. You cannot send it to me. I really have to go there to eat it. We're still not there yet. And yet we are such a tactile species. There's a touch hunger, taste hunger. I want to eat this. I want to taste that. I want to touch this. I want to feel that. And that is still cut off. So Carne y Arena is a great visual and sonic experience. However, the tactile part was absent except for my bare feet on the sand inside the installation space. So even the most technologically advanced IT people, they still have to use the trick of using real stuff to give me tactile sensation. So I don't know. The encoding is still limited, and we will need another revolutionary invention like the transistor to get something that will really take IT encoding to the next level. I'm not imaginative enough to see this happening anytime soon, but here's hoping. But what I want people to know is that really these limitations are still there. So people who want to be creative with technology, they really need to take the discourse to the next level. So they need to work on these borders so that if they want to have a real creative novelty that will just, be sensationalized throughout the world. If innovation is your goal, then you really have to work hard.
Thank you, Mario. Really great insights on your talk. And As always a pleasure to see you. It's always a pleasure to hear your own ideas, and you put this problematic so clearly, and they are so fundamental. Sometimes we forget a little bit about this, and these are on the basis of everything we do. So thank you very much.
I'm afraid I'm just oversimplifying things, but this is my approach. So, but these fundamental questions are really simple and they're still there. So it's just, and technology is so all about the details and, you know, the tiny step forward on this line, but the fundamental questions, there's still an answer. So don't expect any answers from me, just more pointing towards those questions. So thank you, Pedro, for giving me a chance to state the obvious once again.
Thank you, Mario. Always a pleasure. I think they are so fundamental that that's why we forget them sometimes. We need to be reminded. So we need people like you to keep on researching and pushing forward. I think that's our time. Once again, thank you very much, Mario.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you a lot for having me.
You're always welcome. We do this every last Friday of the month, except on December, for the obvious reasons. So you're always welcome at any time, and everyone that is in the audience as well. Thank you very much for being here, and have a nice holidays and weekend. Okay.
Thank you. You too, and everybody stay safe and stay healthy, please. Okay.
Yep, that's it. So bye. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.